It's Russia. Is that why he'll win? No one can defeat an empire when it's determined, united, and ruthless, says Milton Palotov, Russian intellectual and historian of the 19th century. I have never, says the writer, said that I like Russians. On the contrary, in fact, and I have many reasons to feel this way, the Russians, the Slavic race of Varangian origin, have all the characteristics of their same sexes: barbaric, cold, born killers, ruthless, bloodthirsty, warlike, and outcasts. It is neither accidental nor circumstantial that they have the most bloodthirsty, ruthless mafia in the world, and this characteristic is neither new nor recent. They have within them an arrogant ego that they are the only race in the world entitled to lead over others, and therefore their behavior throughout time has literally been a big problem for their neighboring peoples. Even in the era when Russia was divided into duchies and small kingdoms, the Russians of Kiev and later Moscow were never an easy opponent. I would say the opposite. Anyone who messed with them regretted it. They literally fought until won and never surrendered. They counted only one empire and respected only one people, the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire and its Greek inhabitants. Everyone else was just butter to their bread, and yet this people, this empire, the would-be Western overlords, wanted to subjugate it, and I personally laugh out loud, very shaky. It's written by Fiery Scholar. In my previous article, he said, I've analyzed with too much care and hard documents the real and true Ukraine, quote-unquote, which the rotten, perverted priestly of the WF elites who now rule America made to cause today's Russia, and through a completely hybrid war of attrition to bring her to her knees, to make her capitulate, accepting the New World Order of things, designed and extended throughout the Anglo-Saxon West. These people are not just satanic lunatics, they're also illiterate, uneducated, and above all, it says here, stupid. Now, from Yuval Noah Harari, the right-hand man of Klaus Schwab, to catch up and finish with Liz Truss, former Prime Minister of Anglo-Saxon Britain, United Kingdom, and Ursula von der Leyen, who plays the role of the President of the European Commission. Harari is not only the right hand and high priest of Klaus Schwab, he's perhaps also the mastermind of the international organization that calls itself the World Economic Forum. The most contradictory thing about this strange guy is that he plays it apart from his other qualifications and historian. Really, I don't know what kind of history he studied, but to so easily underestimate Russia as a size and as a country completely negates his supposed title. In other words, if he's a historian, I'm the White House cleaner. As for the other two magpies, both Schwab school choices, they actually prove that these are princesses of stupidity and irrelevance from the political moral point of view, and demonstrate the tendency of WF priesthood to select persons who are absolutely not legitimate and who completely lack political leadership skills, precisely to carry out orders of the elite to the letter without much talk and objection. The middlemen of these two are nothing more than simple puppets of the lowest prestige, also corrupt to the core and completely incompetent, and the Russian representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Maria Zakharova, these two ladies who are the heads of the two large important parts of international geopolitics, Britain, EU, has cracked them both openly and openly without these two magpies react to the slightest thing. In fact, he calls them graphic figures through phrases that imply exactly this, and that these two leaders think that the puppeteer Maria is knitting the eulogy. Yes, as I write it, that is why the first one, Liz Truss, could not stand the prime ministership of Britain even for 44 days. She resigned in the midst of stormy reactions as completely unfit for the office. As we found out, if you see the videos before this one, she was the one that gave the message to State Department's that the Nord Stream pipelines were sabotaged, sending him a message to Antony Blinken saying it's done. And obviously that message was seen by the hackers, Russian, Chinese, or whoever they are, according to Kim.com, that she was resigned, quote unquote. So, Liz Truss after 44 days, and Ursula von der Leyen is predicted to fall with a thump from the reactions that were caused from the revelations about the scandalous contracts with Pfizer vaccines, as well as about her family business with the Prime Minister of Greece and his government, as revealed by Italian and Belgian newspapers recently. And because developments are moving at breakneck speed at the time of writing, it's revealed via Twitter that resigned Liz Truss, that female had sent the one-word message, it's done, via her iPhone directly to the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, a minute after the Nord Stream pipelines sabotage and explosion. That is why Maria Zakharova of Russia the other day spoke of Great Britain's guilt, and that she's waiting for London's response to this. This is the Liz Truss message to Blinken. This explains the fact that the Russians sent their Belgorod nuclear submarine sailing near the coast of Britain with their finger on the red button, quote unquote. I'm not in a position to know whether her replacement as Prime Minister, the Indo-British Rishi Sunak, was actually a result of the panic of the House of Commons when Tory MP were informed that Truss had ordered the attack on the Russian pipelines. But what I know for sure is that the Indian-born Sunak may turn out to be the least worst at the moment, not just for Britain, but for the entire planet, since his intentions, at least apparently, are not so good for the neo-Nazi, New World Order Kabbalists. And one of them unfolded just the other day, and it has to do with one of the greatest weapons that the Kabbalist power to destroy the family, namely LGBTQ+, who he is going to delegitimize. In other words, Rishi Sunak says that Britain is not going to legitimize trans and LGBTQ. In other words, to repeal the laws of the early 2010s on legitimizing bisexuals. There are only two sexes, he said. The rest is personal choice. These did not sound good at all to the ears of Klaus Schwab and his company, and we await their reaction. So who is Russia, and why do the New World Order's people want to flatten Russia? Just hearing the name evokes awe and terror, at least for those who are familiar with history. Russia is not just another large and populous European country. Russia is the largest country in the world, and it's a very large imperial country. That is exactly her strong point, and this only makes her omnipotent. The concept of Western-oriented, Western-style democracy has always been relevant in Russia, and I say this because its people had never been trained to be what we call autonomous and to govern democratically. Quite the opposite. They learned to be managed and not to manage. In Russia, the concept of democracy never appeared, except perhaps for the Cossacks, a race of East Slavic Varangian origin who appeared around the end of the 14th century in the region, relatives of the Rus, of the Muscovite Russians, vassals of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which held all of the central western present-day Ukraine. Their administration was completely democratic, and that is why they could not stand the Polish-Lithuanian yoke for long, mainly because of religion. The Cossack Christian Orthodox and other Catholics, the other Catholic, and they also rebelled under the command of the famous Ataman Bogdan Khmelnytsky, who asked, and the assistance of one of the Tsars of Russia, Alexius Romanov, and together they pushed back the Polish-Lithuanians and united with the rest of the Russian territory. The Cossack leaders were always elected, and their democratic ideal was the only point that was not negotiated with anyone, and for the rest they served the Russian Tsar from the 17th century onward. Vladimir Putin, wherever he stands and finds himself, preaches the truth that he wants Russians to be brothers with the rest of the Ukrainians. He's absolutely right. Today's Russia is essentially the expansion of the kingdom of the city of Moscow, 14th century, which was founded by Prince Daniel. All these Slavic peoples were divided into small states called duchies or principalities, and one of them was the Duchy of Moscow, which was a remnant of the state of the Russians, which in turn had been destroyed by the Polish-Lithuanians. So the only enemies for the Muscovites and other Russian Christian Orthodox were the westernized Poles and Lithuanians. All the rest were brothers to each other, both racially and religiously. So Moscow began to expand during the reign of Prince Ivan III, and of the 15th century, when it was finally freed from the Mongol Tsar Tartars, so-called the Golden Horde. Ivan, as a far-sighted and highly capable leader, having already leveled the Polish-Lithuanians by occupying the lands that they had occupied until then, and in particular Lithuania itself, foresaw the final fall of the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire, and decided to ask Sophia Paleologina, a Christian Orthodox Greek from Constantinople, today's Istanbul, in marriage. The beautiful niece of the last emperor Constantinople XI Paleologos, so as to be related to Rome, and thus after the fall of the city of Constantinople, that is today's Istanbul, to the Ottomans, Ivan declares Moscow and its state as the continuation and successor of the Eastern Roman Empire. Moscow is defined as a third Rome, and the Byzantine double-headed eagle is adopted as its new emblem. It was precisely these points that caused the absolute month of the Westerners of the Holy Roman Empire, and especially Pope Pius II, who was forced to say the inimitable, "We will never get rid of this miasma, this abomination," meaning, of course, Christian Orthodoxy and the Eastern Roman Empire. From this point on, the Kingdom of Moscow becomes even more powerful when the famous Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, grandson of Sophia Paleologina and Ivan III, and of course a descendant of the Palaiologos dynasty, takes the Tsarist crown and proclaims himself as Caesar, Tsar of the Third Rome. Caesar means Tsar, okay? So, which caused even greater concern in the Germanic, Anglo-Saxon, and Frankish West controlled by the Vatican, especially hearing the title Caesar, Tsar. Whatever one writes about Ivan the Terrible, it is really little. Russia, however, as an empire, owes a lot to him. A lot, too much. All of the above I mentioned constitute the leaven for the later terrifying hatred of the West against the Russian Empire, a hatred that never subsided because of the Vatican, of course, which saw the nightmare of the resurrection of the Eastern Roman Empire through a rising power that no one knew where it would end up. Indeed, Russia, now with Ivan the Terrible, sweeps everything in its path, conquering lands mainly in the west and south, exterminating both Ottomans and Crimean Tartars. Only once was the Moscow Empire in danger, and it had to do with the period of the Great Famine at the beginning of the 17th century, namely the period 1601 to 1603, which had as its main cause the eruption of the volcano in Peru, probably Sabachaya, whose ash cloud caused major droughts and crop destruction in almost all of the northern Europe. From this great food crisis, Moscow's Russia, which was in a period of anarchy due to the death of Tsar Theodore I, who left no successor, found itself in a very difficult position. The state was run by the boyar caste of plutocrats and landowners, completely incompetent and corrupt, as a result of which the West found an opportunity, and with the guidance of Pope Paul V, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Carabinate, Protectorate of the Vatican and the Holy Roman Empire of Habsburg, to strike back and recapture the lost lands. Despite all this calamity, Moscow, Russia, showed that it has the fabric of an empire and incredible strength in the face of the danger of annihilation. Some groups of volunteer warriors, namely of Cossack origin, came forward, managed to defeat the Polish-Lithuanians, and captured the lost lands, while in the meantime the Senate elected Michael I of the Romanov dynasty as the new Tsar. The Empire of Russia reached its peak under the leadership of Peter I the Great, and where it was officially declared as an empire, having already colonized the entire Siberian steppe in the mid-17th century, and having leveled Sweden in the Great Northern War. It was the first time the Polish-Lithuanians had made an alliance with Russia against Sweden for control of the Baltic. Another long story. From the reign of Peter the Great onwards, and St. Petersburg takes his name because it was developed by him. So from the reign of Peter the Great onwards, the Russian Empire, having reached as far as America, having occupied the part of Alaska, and forming a vast empire which started from the fringes of northern and central Europe, passed through all of northern Asia, and ended up in the new land of American continent, it was necessary, including among the great European powers, England, France, Germany, Prussia, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. And I write necessarily because the Westerners, who were controlled by the Vatican and the secret lodges of the Enlightened, they did not even try, even with the slightest effort, to sympathize with Russia and tolerate her. Only Napoleon III of France and Hitler, 3 centuries later, thought they could conquer Russia, both having conquered half of Europe in the meantime, and they paid dearly for it. Since then, no one else has ventured, and then the disappointment. But what the Westerners and the Habsburg Holy Roman Empire and the Vatican did not succeed, the Enlightened and the secret societies of the Kabbalists tried to achieve from within through Freemasonry. The October Revolution of the Khazarian Jewish Kabbalists was a product of their secret societies and Freemasonry. Karl Marx, an employee and subordinate of the Rothschild family, promulgated the Communist Manifesto, stirring the stagnant waters of the already developing capitalism in Europe and America, with the ultimate goal of invading Tsarist Romanov Russia. And indeed, in October 1917 and in St. Petersburg, the Bolshevik Party, led by Vladimir Lenin, found the opportunity it was asking for and taking advantage of the strange situation that had risen after the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II. The provisional government of Alexander Kerensky started an armed rebellion consisting of common people of all kinds, workers, peasants, even conscripts and army officers, taking the whole Russian territory with them. The result was that Russia was divided into republics, which formed the USSR, which lasted for more than 70 years, with the ultimate goal of the disappearance of orthodoxy and its imperial structure, so that gradually Russia would change its mentality, forget traditions and roots, and become a force that would in the future degenerate and eventually disappear. But fate, which only God directs, had a different opinion and other plans. Russia, in the form of the USSR, also withstood the attack of Hitler's Westerners, regrouped and emerged victorious from World War II. 50 years later, she was also freed from the abomination of the Kabbalists. She found the leader who suited her, and from a pile of ruins, that's where the communist abomination of Kabbalism had reached her. She managed to in almost 20 years, not only to stand on her own 2 feet, but to become again the great superpower it always was. So I hope up to this point I've given a clear picture of what the Russian Empire really is, and how and why Westerners hate it to the core. If you did not understand why, let me make a conclusion even more detailed. Because the Russian Empire does not only have territorial, population, geopolitical power, it has the symbolism of the continuation of the Western-hated Christian Orthodox Eastern Roman Empire, and therefore as a symbol of Christian Orthodoxy with the emblem of the legendary double-headed eagle, and of the one and only true religion of Christ. It is a rampart for the prevalence of Khazar Kabbalist Satanists. And it is not at all coincidental that the so-called Khazarian Jamie Rashkin said that Russia is an Orthodox country that advocates traditional values. That is why it must be destroyed, whatever the price the U.S. pays for it, he said. This revelation belongs to the blog The Orthodox and to the dearest Kostat Torres, who published the blog, and that's why they want to hide, but Joy won't let her. So Mr. Rushkin, who is also of Russian descent, by the way, well done. Just be careful not to tear the tights you wear under your pants while you fight the terrible Russians at all costs. If only Ivan the Terrible could hear you, he'd be holding his belly laughing. So now with this effortless confessions of the Khazarians, we have proof of what we are living through and who are really responsible for what's going on into humanity. Why Russia will defeat, quote-unquote, the beast. In my previous article, the author says, the name of the beast I had analyzed as correctly as I could, the meaning given by St. John, the theologian, the beloved apostle of Christ in the book of Revelation, to the who of his unholy and gangster gang of the lunatics and their purposes. We're talking about the Antichrist and his minions. The beast, St. John describes, is so vividly he describes it so vividly I could go on. Not in the way that someone ignorant of his day or someone later up to the end of the 20th century could understand, but someone who would live in the age of the beast, in other words, someone or some contemporaries of the beast. It has 10 horns and 7 heads, which implies in terms of horns apparently the words 10 largest multinationals. The author says, for example, Microsoft, Apple, Coca-Cola, Unilever, J&J, Aramco, Sinopec, Volkswagen, Nestle. For the 7 heads, he probably implies the G7 of France, Germany, UK, USA, Japan, Italy, Canada, European Union. Russia is no longer among them for a decade. All these together constitute an economic political beast, quote-unquote, which is managed by a large informal organization, which we call the World Economic Forum. That is, the World Economic Forum headed by Klaus Schwab. On these horns there are diadems, that is, crowns, which means that they have great and mighty authority and power. And on the 7 heads there are phrases blasphemous to the face of God, that is, in other words, St. John implies the false climate changes, legalization, promotion of debauchery, posthumanism, digital politics, and such. And all these after all that offend God and his creations. But the whole essence is hidden in his physical gifts, that is, in the mouth and the legs of the beast. He has bear's feet, lion's mouth. For bear paws, our mind easily goes to Russia, but no. Russia has been part of this beast, but since 2014, completely separated its position, overthrowing of Yanukovych in Ukraine and America's attack on Syria, and to topple there the only obstacle into their plans in the Middle East. They heard the name Assad, and a few years later, Putin launched a direct attack on the Rothschilds, giving them the conflict. So the lion's mouth could not be other than what the author believes the West. So if we look back at history and evidence, we'll see that the lion has always been the sign of the Saxon German tribes, part of which is England. We even have the England on the crest of England, as part of the Saxons occupying the 5th, 6th centuries, a large part of the Celtic Britain, thus creating the gender of the Anglo-Saxons. And from their first king, Egbert of Wessex, 9th century, to the Windsor dynasty, the emblem of the Anglo-Saxon is the lion in various guises. As for the bear paws, now de facto they could not belong to Russia. But of course, in the other Russia, the Catholic one, Kiev, Russia, hence in Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, and all the other Slavic tribes that embrace by force. So this beast, the Anglo-Saxon West, which has been completely taken over by Antichrist, being called upon to fight a war with no tomorrow for her. So in the instructions of New World Order since the 90s, could not dismantle it and reap its wealth. They had found it in everything with the modern boyars, hence the oligarchy of the wealth of the former USSR. Although they tried tooth and nail, they ran into hard-nosed Putin and lost the game by a heavy score. Now, Putin's weapons was the oil wells and natural gas. With this superweapon, Russia managed to become a superpower again, making all of Europe and especially Germany its subordinate since they were all dependent on the Russian energy that was sold cheaply, thus crushing big oil companies of the Anglo-Saxon bloc. All that was left in the West was the Ukraine, which everyone knew that the Midwest part of it hated Moscow beyond imagination and was controlled by Vatican because of the unicism and Catholicism that there they focused their efforts on to bring half a step before joining NATO. Demographically, however, the Catholic part was a minority. The majority were the Russian-speaking of Eastern Ukraine, which produced a Russian-loving president. And then the New World Order, George Soros, and the Open Society Organization to pave way for another revolution in Ukraine, similar to what happened in the Middle East nations. And after they managed, in the meantime, to join NATO, all the countries of the former Warsaw Pact focused on Ukraine since 2009, and with constant disturbances, they ambushed President Yanukovych, and until 2014 they forced him to resign, and power was taken by the most extreme pro-Western neo-Nazis, the famous Right Sector, an organization with a state structure and the most extremists that had appeared in Europe since 1945. So from that point on, Putin and his staff understood that soon, very soon indeed, they would have an all-out conflict with the West already subjugated to Schwab and his company of colleagues, and that conflict might even be nuclear. And in order not to waste any more time with a grandiose, lightning-fast move, he integrates Crimea, cutting off perhaps the most strategic part from Ukraine. The reaction for the West, completely surprised by Putin's move, was to impose almost 5,000 sanctions on him and Russia. Trump's break in America's leadership was literally God-sent. In that 4-year period, Putin not only doubled his power despite the crushing sanctions imposed on Russia, but he also vastly advanced military technology, building literally breathtaking weapons and dropping them into the Syrian arena, annihilating jihadists. The last attempt of the Westerners to approach the now super powerful Tsar of Russia after they saw and gave up took place October 2019, when the strange simulation for the future COVID pandemic took place, having already zoned the planet for their plans for the Great Reset that would begin alongside the pandemic. They offered Putin the sphere of influence of half of the Third World and a small piece of Northern Europe to entice him. Putin demanded more by throwing on the table energy, and that's where China intervened, which felt kicked, and the agreement broke down. Putin withdrew from everywhere and moved closer to China, now implementing the BRICS plan. From this point, it starts for good, the underground war that has reached the point where the West, through Ukraine and its puppet president, Zelensky, provokes Russia to a level by joining NATO, and the rest we know. Now, will Russia win? Essentially, the West did not want war with the Russians under any circumstances. This is shown by the strange behavior of the Supreme Advisor, orchestrator of New World Order, Henry Kissinger. Almost a month ago, specifically October 3rd, he declared that it is not wise at all to include Ukraine in NATO, and he even stated with disdain at the meeting that took place in Davos, Switzerland, during the same time period, that the Ukrainians will need to capitulate as soon as possible with Russia because they will be destroyed. And he went on to say, "I see no choice but to make Mr. Putin's stated security concerns seriously. I believe it's wrong for NATO to alert the Ukraine that it could finally join the alliance," is what Kissinger said. He said roughly the same thing last August, warning that the US is on the brink of direct war with Russia and China, and that we are headed for a global nuclear war for no reason, Kissinger said. In other words, the Henry Kissinger rebukes the insane, completely incompetent, false leaders of the Schwab School and Klaus himself, and instead of the Great Reset and the arrival of the world leader, the Antichrist, a new order will be created that will only be controlled by Russia and its allies, since all the economic, technical, geopolitical measures taken by the West, plus the sanctions against Russia, instead of harming and immobilizing it, as they might, his minions assured, they turned Russia into a global giant and fully united and determined. Indeed, Ivan the Terrible and Peter the Great awoke in them at the same time. Now put up with 200 million angry Russians and the world's largest nuclear arsenal, which has the most advanced Satan III nuclear-tipped missiles that can penetrate any anti-missile system in existence today. That is, the beast trembles? Definitely yes, especially with the turn that things have now taken, and after the entry of Belarus, the genuine child of Mother Russia, into the war. The author says, I firmly believe that the fall of Kiev is now a matter of a month or two, not to say days, and I become graphic. Epilogue, Russia, that's why it will win. That is exactly the phrase I would say to the face both of the mouse-faced Yuval Harari and Klaus Schwab himself, who completely controls the presidency of the US and the entire White House, subito. I'm not saying it, history says so, and history is not simply a book recording the events over the centuries in the life of humanity. It's also the book that teaches us the characters, the behavior, and the causes of the course of nations through time. Whoever ostentatiously ignores history, she avenges history, repeating the outcome of mistakes made in history. How much longer and in what other ways should I put it? The would-be dominant Westerns know very well what I'm saying, have never in the past dared to square off with the bear. They always treated her with kindness and condescension. Was she a joke? Of course not, especially with Russia. They knew and still know what awaits them. Now, how much more when they are now dealing with number one empire in the world, and now upon the emergency implemented by the Great Reset, immediate rescue of the Rothschilds and emergency implementation world government plan, the only obstacle to this is Russia, it seems. And Russia, which is built on the foundation of the great Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire, hence all East, and in its blood runs the blood of Greek emperors, a Russian that became great because it embraces the big weapon of the Byzantines, Christian Orthodoxy, with the philosophy of Greeks, with which it sculpted, is a de facto winner. Why? Because, please, 150 nationalities, small and large, have incorporated just like into the footsteps of the Byzantine Empire of the Greeks, into the Russian world. Kazakhs, Azeris, Chechens, Ossetians, Belarusians, Kabardinians, Caucasians, Yakuts, Uzbekis, Tajiks, Georgians, Balkars, Kyrgyz, Karelians, Kadi, Latvians, Estonians, Gagauz, Abkhaz, and a bunch of other small ethnic groups have at this time become one, constituted a huge mass of people who have become Russified, speaking one language, and mainly embracing one religion, Christian Orthodoxy, and believing that what Moscow believes too is that Tsar Vladimir Putin. Just the fact that it is time one of the most unruly populations, the Chechens, are helping Russia, trying to take down neo-Nazis Ukraine. The exact opposite is true in America. Hundreds of ethnicists, but without absolutely any connecting link, make up the New World, completely deprived of the timeless values which they replaced with the hunting for money in every way. In other words, money is the god in America, and the American dream, which means good life, opulence, a house with a swimming pool, and a purebred dog. The population group of this is one devoid of real fundamental human values, is a doomed to defeat. And the history of the U.S. after World War II counts only losses. We are certainly not talking about attacks on military weak countries like Serbia or Iraq, in which they made a show of force. Putin so far has played his game with more than mastery. He did not end the war quickly, as many Westerners expected, only to accuse him later of real and not Musantine war crimes. No. First, fight smart, and then at a very high risk, of course. He first wanted to exhaust Western Europeans in terms of energy and food, and then make them fight each other. He played bras de fer, arm wrestling, with a genius plan, always having as his weapon patience and, above all, the sacrifice of protecting civilians, especially the Rome-speaking areas. And of course, he exposed almost en masse the West Anglo-Saxons in their game, especially after Nord Stream revelations, and by doing the impossible, turning the people of Western Europe against their leaders, demanding that they stop supporting Zelensky and cancel the sanctions against Russia. In other words, the truth was shown in all its glory. Even Elon Musk, the billionaire who used to belong to the WF elite club, changed course long ago in real fear of what would happen if Russia armed its big guns, and now openly sided with the sensible Republicans going straight against Bill Gates, Yuval Harari, and Klaus Schwab by buying Twitter on the one hand, and on the other taking away the Ukrainians' permission to use SpaceX satellite system, from where they took orders from NATO to strike Russian targets. So you see, dear readers and congregants, what are God's plans? Do you see how, with a simple nod or a flick of his fingers, God's fingers, everything can be turned upside down? How many times in my text did I not point out that God has better plans than the New World Order Kabbalists? How many times have I told you to trust God, and he will do all the right things at the right time? Let's believe in his power even now. And this was from Fiery Scholar. I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.